everyone, and welcome back to Quantum Talk. We are very excited because today we are going to talk a little bit about barriers. This will only be an introduction to barriers, and we're very excited to tell you about this because for myself, I've seen the biggest change in who I am once I've dealt with my barriers. And in my mind, I always wanted to act in a certain way or react in a certain way, but when I was confronted with situations, it almost felt like what I wanted and how I wanted to react couldn't come through. I kept just reacting. And it's only once I really dealt with my barriers that I could start choosing how I want to react and not just react instinctively. And a lot of the clients that I see also, they say they're not as reactive. Certain doors opened in their life. There was a lot of healing that took place. So we just want to introduce you today to what is a barrier and how does it work? And we'll probably do a follow-up session on this. So yeah, Azan, is there something you want to add?
This is one of my favorite topics, and it's one of my favorite things to work on with my clients. And I'm so glad that we're doing this podcast because I don't think people really understand the influence that barriers have on your life, on your relationships, on your relationship with God, on your emotional health, and how freeing it is to get rid of it. I think if I can just say, as part of this introduction, is that every person has got barriers. I have not met people that don't have barriers. Sometimes the subconscious will keep it hidden for a while or won't present it immediately because the barrier is really a soulish response to trying to protect you. And but when you start dealing with a person and as they heal, more and more barriers come up. So firstly, I want to say that most people have multiple barriers. And what I like to do is to identify a barrier at a time and work through it. And then I also find it's easier for the next barrier to come up. So before we start, I think let's just define what a barrier is, and then we'll take it from there. So what happens is that we all go through hurt and disappointment and fear and rejection, and our subconscious mind, really out of a soulish response, tries to protect our hearts. We know that the Word of God says to guard our heart, but we should be doing that in a spiritual, biblical way. But because of the times we live in, there's a lot of things we should be doing in a spiritual, biblical way that we are not doing in a spiritual, biblical way. We are living out of our souls. And when you allow the soul then to try and protect you, the only thing it can think of doing is to start building a wall around your heart. Why the heart? Because the heart is the emotional seat. It's the emotional foundation of your being. It's from the heart that most of our emotions and feelings flow forth.
And also, sorry, just want to interject. So when you think of even people who are not believers, will say that my heart is sore. And so your heart is the only organ that really experiences, and it's an instinctive, natural thing. It's an animalistic thing. Right? All people experience this. This is not belief driven. This is nature driven.
Yes.
And I think that's an important distinction to also have to say that it's something that is built into you as a human being, is that the heart will feel your pain.
Yes. So what the subconscious does is it decides, well, I need to protect this person's heart. And so what it wants to do is it wants to build a protection, but it needs resources. So if you think of building a wall, you can't build a wall out of nothing. And the resources in the body are already allocated to have certain purposes. So the only resources in the body that does not have a specific purpose is excess energy that gets stuck as trauma. So what the subconscious will do then is wherever that trauma is stuck, it could be stuck in your little toe, in your brain, in your arm, in a kidney, in your liver, wherever it got stuck, the subconscious goes and it harvests that extra energy and it brings it up to the heart. And if you imagine a wall that's built out of building blocks or stones, or bricks, what the subconscious does is each one of these frequencies is like a little brick, and it starts placing it brick by brick by brick. And what's interesting is that the barrier is not just brick by brick by brick, but also layer by layer by layer. Because over time, this process continues, and the subconscious just keeps on stacking another layer and another layer and another layer of trauma frequencies or of stuck emotions until you've got what we call a barrier. Now, some of the things that people will say to me, and I immediately go, barrier is I struggle to feel love. I struggle to connect with other people. I can't connect to God. So those are the things that really immediately make me think barrier. Two other things that really stand out for me is anxiety and depression. A lot of a person's anxiety and depression is stuck in their barrier. So what happens is that, like Natanya explained, she's got this intention to react in a certain way, but what is in her brain and what comes out in the end is two different things. And the reason for that is that all of your intention and emotion that you then express goes through this filter of your barrier. So by the time it gets to the person on the outside, it's been filtered through all of your rejection, all of your fear, all of your self-abuse, all of your unworthy and pain and wounded. And that's what that person experiences, all of your anger. And this, it works the other way around as well. Let's say Natanya really loves me, and she is just dumping love on me, and I love you so much and you're amazing. Everything that she does and says gets filtered again through my barrier before it gets to my heart. So by the time all of her love and good intentions get inside of me, it's also filtered through all of my rejection and fear. And that's why people struggle to make relationships work. Often when people with marriage problems come and see me, I immediately start working on both their barriers. And I've actually got a great testimony of this, where I worked with a husband and a wife. They'd been married for, I think, 10 or 11 years. And they sent me a testimony afterwards. I released both their barriers, and they said that previously they used to go on a boat trip once a year. And they said that it wasn't 2 days into their trip, and they would be fighting like cat and dog, like they want to throw each other off the boats. And this time, after we'd worked on their barriers, they did 2 weeks on the boat, and they said it felt like their honeymoon. They were so in love. They didn't fight. There was no conflict. There was no misunderstandings. So that's just one of the examples of how profoundly a barrier affects our relationship with others.
Yes, so I remember when I started out with this, I met a new client, and we started working on her barrier. And she actually, we were talking about things, and so she named a lot of things that I associated with a barrier. But one of the other things that I often see barriers are connected to is also financial issues, or where you struggle to get that promotion. Someone else is constantly promoted ahead of you, and it's as if you are overlooked, or as if your pay raises are overlooked, or your efforts are overlooked. That's also a barrier, because the barrier's job in another essence is to keep people at a distance. Because if you, the past has taught me, when I let people come close, they hurt me. And so it's better to keep people at a distance. And what then happens if you have a work setting where you have to work with people and people need to promote you, etc., etc., they feel this sort of standoffishness from you that your heart wall is giving out. So it can also have a huge financial implication on you. And if your finances depend on you being able to work with people, or if you are in service delivery, where you are the one delivering the service, people can also feel like, I connect with this other person better. This person is sort of, or they take offense quickly or whatever. So that's the one thing. The other thing for me is that trauma is layered, like you said, this is layered around the heart wall. And so if you are confronted with someone innocently trying to say something in love or correction or whatever, your heart will connect it to that trauma and you become defensive.
Yes, so I just want to say for our viewers, heart wall is a barrier because I
Oh,
just
sorry,
don't want them to
yes.
get confused. Yes.
Yes, sorry, I use a different term and it always gets confused
Yes.
with
So if yeah, it's a barrier that we're talking about, but the barrier is a wall around the heart.
Yes, sorry. So these barriers that we build up can be specific to situations, right? You can have a barrier when it comes to relationships. You can have a barrier when it comes to specific relationships. You can have a barrier when it comes to family relationships alone. And so I had this client where she grew up with a stepfather who wasn't a particularly nice person. He was emotionally distant and a bit abusive towards the family. And she herself has never been able to really date successfully. And we started looking into why. And it's because of this barrier that she has that says, I will never marry someone like my stepfather. And so all of that trauma from her experience, she put into protecting her heart because she didn't want to be wounded in relationships like her mother was, for an example. So yeah, and they can be specific to trauma situations. And as soon as you feel the release, like I think you said, you feel so free. And I think that's the best way of describing it. As soon as you get that freeing experience, only then can you understand what you've carried with you.
Yeah, it's very difficult to explain it to someone if they haven't experienced it themselves. What a lot of my clients will say, and they all say more or less the same thing, is even if they go through difficult times or conflicts, they get over it much faster. So it's not like they dwell on it like they used in the past. They forgive faster. And they just feel emotionally more stable and less up and down in their emotions. It's very important what you noted about building a barrier against a specific person or specific circumstances. So I've got clients that are in difficult marriages, and I always test, and 99% of the time, the woman has got a barrier against the husband and the husband's got a barrier against the wife. The stepfather is a good example as well. And it can be against circumstances. So people that have maybe struggled financially in the past could have a financial barrier. If you have conflict with someone, you know, you mentioned about that inner vow as well. I will never marry someone like my mom. You know, sometimes barriers are related to those I will nevers that we make. And then we build a barrier against that. But I think this is a good introduction into barriers. I would really like to do another podcast and maybe go into a bit more detail on each one of the different types of barriers that you get. And maybe we can share some testimonies of clients that we've had. And I want to finish off with the most common symptoms of a general barrier, because that's usually where we start. We start with the general barrier, and that's just in general all of your disappointment and hurt and fear and everything. Your heart allows your subconscious to build this general barrier around the heart. So the common symptoms are feeling isolated. So although you have people in your life, you still feel lonely, misunderstood, abandoned. Another thing is struggling with anxiety, depression, or both of those. Not achieving breakthrough at work or in relationships, feeling stuck. Another thing that people say that have a barrier, usually quite a few barriers, is that they feel emotionally shut down. It's like they can't connect with their emotions. Not being able to meet a life partner. Like you said, the idea of the barrier is actually to keep people at bay. So that's a big thing. Once you start dealing with a person's barrier, they become more relatable. It's easier for other people to have relationships with them. Feelings of anger and resentment, holding on to grudges and offenses, unforgiveness, that type of thing. I've got a lot of people that see me for anger, and I always start with the anger barrier. So that's something that's also, you know, a key that we can use. Trouble giving and receiving love. and discomfort in the shoulders, upper back and neck, and heart palpitations. So not only does this affect you emotionally and in your relationships and even spiritually with your relationship with God, but it can physically manifest, because remember, it's all of those energy now around the heart. It's pulling you down. It's actually pulling your frame so that it's not straight and upright. And that creates a lot of strain on the neck and the shoulders and the upper back and the muscles in that area. And because of all that energy around the heart, it can actually affect the heart's own energy and cause, stabbing pains in the chest or heart palpitations, that kind of physical symptoms. And there's actually physically nothing wrong with you. Now, okay, if you leave that for many, many years and the heart keeps on struggling like that, it can lead to eventual physical damage in the heart. But that's why we need to deal with this, right?
Yes, and I also think why people feel so free, and as you explained this, as it pulls your frame down, it is because you carry all of these things with you for years and years and years. And that's why it's also, you are literally carrying these things around your heart, and it becomes weighty the longer you leave it. And
Yes.
that's the one thing. And just another thing that I also sometimes use to identify, this is actually, I think, a barrier problem, is when people say that I meant this and other people experience this.
Oh, yes, that makes a lot of sense, because it's filtered through all of the
Yes.
trauma.
Is
Yes.
when I meant to do this thing and then it was experienced as this. That I also identify. It might be other things, like an inner vow, like you said. There might be some other things connected to it, but it definitely is because of that filtering through your traumas, that your intention is experienced in a different way, or someone else's intention is experienced by you in a different way.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Natanya. Our contact details will be on the comment section of this podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in our next podcast.
Thank you, guys.